Hello and welcome back to our series on Bach's Orgelbüchlein. Today we're going to look at the very last prelude in the set, Ach wie nichtig, ach wie flüchtig. The hymn itself discusses the transitory nature of human life. So it's maybe ironic that the hymn has 13 verses, each taking a different aspect of humanity, so lifespan or joy or beauty or strength or whatever it is, and comparing them to a mist that's dissipated, a river that flows ever onwards, a flower that withers, and so on and so on. It actually seems to go on forever. So there's some symbolism in the ceaseless semiquaver movement in Bach's piece, rather like that river constantly flowing away, as well as in that ending, which feels interrupted, cut off in its prime. It just stops. Incidentally, this last piece is perhaps the final example of Bach just rushing a little and making a trivial and unimportant error. The first couplet of each verse is alternately either Ach wie flüchtig, ach wie nichtig, or Ach wie nichtig, ach wie flüchtig. And the hymn actually begins with the first of those, that's flüchtig and nichtig, whereas Bach writes the title the other way around. Of course, it doesn't matter a jot. It's a very minor slip of the pen, but it's just another sign of Bach, the fallible human. The way the music's put together is the classic Orgelbüchlein pattern. The chorale is almost unadorned across the top. There's a figuration of scales in the alto and tenor parts, and there's a rhythmically driving pedal part in quavers, consisting generally of an upbeat followed by an octave leap downwards. The hands obviously need to be played on the same manual. So it's a very simple texture, and the text is reflective, and it's to do, as I say, with the transitory nature of existence. So it certainly doesn't want a grand or even particularly solid sound. I'd go usually with flutes. I tend towards an 8 and a 4-foot flute, or just an 8-foot flute, or in this particular case, on this organ, I'm using a rather distinctive pair of 8-foots. The pedals don't come into any kind of conflict with the manual, so you can use 16 and 8-foot flutes if you've got them, or couple a 16-foot pedal to the manual. I'm coupling a 16-foot pedal to the other manual, just for clarity. Tempo, we've talked a lot about tempo and it being judged partly on the occasion and partly on the harmonic rhythm. Here the harmonic rhythm is very clearly the crotchet beats. Basically there's one new harmony for each note of the chorale, which in combination with those scale patterns suggests a flowing tempo. It shouldn't drag. The texture is at its most complicated in the last 2 bars, so if we take the quickest tempo that doesn't feel rushed in those last 2 bars, it should be about right. I'm taking today a fairly modest tempo. It can and is sometimes played rather faster than this. The reason that I'm doing the slightly more laid back tempo is to do partly with the instrumental part of the building. We've spoken before, rather often I think, about 18th century music not requiring the kind of romantic legato technique that's the foundation of modern fingering. And as we said in the introductory video, there are arguments for using consciously old fingering methods, but I'm not going to go into that here. But in my view, there's no need to devise elaborate fingerings, for example, in the right hand of bar 4, where there are parallel sixths. They can just be played with the same fingers, the 1st and the 5th, for example. A lot of faster moving 18th century music works on this nearly but not quite legato principle, which subtly enhances the rhythmic drive by making up beats and run up to cadences ever so slightly more detached. Not so much as you'd notice, but more on a subconscious kind of level. So how do we articulate the pedal notes? Well, obviously the upbeats are going to be slightly detached, and the octave leaps, well, a good way of thinking about articulation is always how would you play it on another instrument? A cello, say, or a bassoon. Would you use separate bows on the cello? Well, I would personally, and by extension it feels naturally to me just to mark each note slightly, dum, ti, dum. So the octave notes won't be detached in the same way as the upbeats, but are not quite legato either. Great little piece to end the Orgelbüchlein